The gunshot echoed through the valley just as Grace Lancaster felt the horse beneath her stumble. And in the chaos of flying hooves and screaming animals, she found herself tumbling down the muddy embankment toward the churning brown water of the Kettle River below. It was May of 1887, and the spring rains had been relentless across the Washington Territory. Grace had traveled from Spokane Falls to Republic, a rough mining town nestled in the mountains, to claim the small parcel of land her late uncle had left her in his will. She was 22 years old, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and determined to build a life on her own terms in this wild country. But she had not anticipated the bandits who had been plaguing the mountain roads, nor had she expected the wagon train she traveled with to be ambushed just 10 miles outside of town. The cold water hit her like a fist, driving the air from her lungs. Grace clawed at the surface, her heavy skirts immediately becoming anchors that dragged her down. She had grown up in Philadelphia, where young ladies learned needlepoint and piano, not how to swim. Her father had considered such activities unladylike, and now that decision might cost her everything. She broke the surface once, gasping, her arms flailing uselessly as the current seized her and pulled her along. The river was swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, racing through the canyon with terrifying speed. Her mouth filled with muddy water and she choked, going under again. This was how she would die, she thought with strange clarity. Not in some comfortable bed surrounded by family, but alone in a river in the middle of nowhere, her dreams of independence drowning with her. Then something solid grabbed her arm. Grace felt herself being hauled upward with such force that her shoulders screamed in protest. Her head broke the surface and she coughed violently, retching up river water. Through her streaming eyes she could make out a face above her, rugged and weathered, with intense dark eyes and a strong jaw covered in several days of stubble. "I have got you," a deep voice said. "Stop fighting or we will both go under." Grace tried to obey, but her body would not cooperate. Every instinct screamed at her to grab onto something, anything. Her fingers clutched at the man's shirt, the worn fabric bunching in her fists. "Listen to me," the voice commanded, sharp enough to cut through her panic. "You need to hold onto my shoulders and let me do the swimming." "Can you do that?" "I cannot swim," Grace managed to gasp out between mouthfuls of water. "I know. That is why I am here. Hold on." But even as she wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, Grace could feel them both being pulled under by the weight of her sodden clothes and the relentless current. The man, whoever he was strong, but the river was stronger. They surfaced again, and this time Grace saw the raw determination on his face as he fought to keep them both above water. "My name is Zachary Griffin," he said, his voice steady despite the strain she could see in every line of his body. "And I am not letting you die today." Zachary had been tracking the bandits for 3 days. As one of the few competent deputies in Republic, he had made it his personal mission to stop the gang that had been terrorizing travelers on the mountain roads. He had heard the gunshots and arrived just in time to see the chaos, the scattered wagons, the frightened horses, and one woman tumbling down the embankment into the raging river. He had not hesitated. He had kicked his horse into a gallop along the riverbank, then dove in when he was ahead of her position. But now, with the full force of the Kettle River trying to drag them both to the bottom, Zachary was beginning to understand the magnitude of his decision. His boots were full of water, heavy as lead weights. His gun belt had thankfully come loose and fallen away, but his clothes were still dragging at him with every stroke he tried to make toward the bank. The woman he was holding was deadweight in his arms, her fear making her rigid and uncoordinated. But her eyes, green as spring grass, were locked on his face with absolute trust, and that trust gave him strength he did not know he possessed. "There is a bend up ahead," Zachary said, his breath coming in harsh gasps. "Slower water. We just need to make it there." "I am so sorry," Grace whispered, and he could hear the tears in her voice mixing with the river water on her face. "No apologizing," Zachary said firmly. "Save your breath." He shifted his grip, getting one arm around her waist and using the other to pull them through the water. His muscles burned with the effort. The current kept trying to spin them around, to separate them, to drag them under. Zachary kicked hard, aiming for the inside of the bend where he knew the water would be calmer. If he could just get them there, they might have a chance. A submerged log appeared out of nowhere, slamming into Zachary's ribs with brutal force. He grunted but did not let go of Grace. The impact spun them around, and suddenly they were both underwater, tumbling in the brown murk. Zachary held his breath and held Grace, refusing to release her even as his lungs began to burn. He had no idea which way was up. Then his feet touched something solid. The riverbed. Zachary pushed off hard and they broke the surface together. Grace was coughing and crying, but she was alive. They were both alive. "Almost there," Zachary said, though he was not sure if he was reassuring her or himself. The bend was just ahead now. Zachary could see where the river widened and the current slowed. He kicked toward it with the last of his strength, every muscle in his body screaming for rest. Grace had gone limp in his arms, either from exhaustion or unconsciousness. He could not tell. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her dark hair plastered to her face. They reached the calmer water, and Zachary felt the difference immediately. The river was no longer actively trying to kill them. He could actually make progress toward the bank now instead of just fighting to stay afloat. But his strength was nearly gone. His arms felt like they were made of stone, and his legs barely responded to his commands. "Help!" Zachary shouted, his voice raw. "Somebody help us!" He knew it was unlikely anyone would hear. They had traveled at least a mile downstream from where the ambush had occurred. The riverbank on both sides was steep and covered in dense brush. But he shouted anyway, because giving up was not something Zachary Griffin knew how to do. "Help! We are in the river." Grace stirred in his arms, coughing weakly. "I can hear you," she mumbled against his chest. "I know. I am not shouting at you. I am shouting for help. Is anyone there?" "Not yet." Zachary managed to get them another few feet closer to shore. The bank was tantalizingly close now, maybe 20 feet away, but it might as well have been 20 miles. His body simply would not cooperate anymore. His legs would not kick. His arms would not pull. The best he could do was tread water and hold Grace's head above the surface. "I need you to do something for me," Zachary said, his voice little more than a whisper now. "What?" Grace's eyes opened, focusing on him with effort. "I need you to hold on to me. Wrap your arms around my neck and your legs around my waist. Can you do that?" Grace nodded slowly. With trembling limbs, she did as he asked, clinging to him like a child. The shift in position freed up Zachary's arms, and he used them to pull them through the water with slow, steady strokes. It was working. They were moving toward the bank, inch by painful inch. "Tell me your name," Zachary said. He needed to keep her conscious, keep her talking. "Grace Lancaster." "Where are you from?" "Grace Lancaster, Philadelphia. I came here to claim some land. My uncle left it to me." "That is very brave," Zachary said, "coming all this way alone." "I was not alone. There was a whole wagon train, but then the bandits came and everything went wrong." "I know. I am sorry I did not get there sooner. You saved my life." "We are not safe yet," Zachary reminded her, though his words were contradicted by the fact that his feet had just touched bottom. They were in the shallows now, close enough to shore that he could stand, though the water still came up to his chest. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that his knees nearly buckled. But he locked them and started wading toward the bank, Grace still clinging to him. His boots sank into the muddy riverbed with each step, making progress slow and exhausting. But it was progress. They reached the bank and Zachary half climbed, half crawled up onto solid ground, Grace still in his arms. He made it about 6 feet from the water's edge before his body simply gave out. He collapsed onto his back in the grass. Grace sprawled across his chest, both of them gasping for air like landed fish. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just lay there, feeling the solid earth beneath them and the warm spring sun on their faces. Zachary could hear his heart pounding in his ears, could feel the burn of overexerted muscles in every part of his body. He had never been so exhausted in his entire life. "Are we alive?" Grace asked finally, her voice muffled against his wet shirt. "Yes." "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain." Grace lifted her head to look at him, and for the first time, Zachary got a good look at her face. She was beautiful, even bedraggled and covered in mud. Her green eyes were striking, framed by dark lashes, and her face had a delicate bone structure that suggested breeding and education. Her lips were full and currently blue with cold, and there was a small cut on her forehead that was bleeding sluggishly. "Thank you," Grace said softly. "You saved my life." "You already said that. It bears repeating." Zachary found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. "You are welcome." They lay there for another minute, gathering their strength. Then Zachary carefully shifted Grace off of him and sat up, looking around to assess their situation. They were on the east bank of the river, surrounded by dense forest. He had no idea exactly how far downstream they had traveled, but it had to be at least a mile, maybe more. His horse was long gone, along with all his supplies. They had nothing but the wet clothes on their backs. "Can you walk?" Zachary asked. Grace sat up slowly, testing her limbs. "I think so. I am sore, but nothing feels broken." "Good. We need to get moving. We are both soaked and the temperature is going to drop once the sun goes down. We need to find shelter and get warm." "What about the others? The people from the wagon train?" "If they survive the ambush, they are either already in Republic or heading there now. The town is not far, maybe 8 or 9 miles upriver, but we cannot go back that way, not without a horse and supplies." "So what do we do?" Zachary considered their options. They could try to follow the river back upstream on foot, but it would be slow going through the dense brush, and they would be exposed if the bandits were still in the area. Or they could head east, deeper into the mountains, and try to find one of the mining camps or homesteads that were scattered throughout the territory. "There is a mining operation about 5 miles east of here," Zachary said. "A place called Copper Creek. If we can make it there, they will have supplies and probably a wagon we can borrow to get back to Republic." 5 miles, Grace repeated, looking down at her ruined dress and sodden boots. "In wet clothes. I know it is not ideal, but it is our best option." Grace took a deep breath and nodded. "Then we should start walking." Zachary helped her to her feet, noting the way she swayed slightly before steadying herself. She was tougher than she looked, this Philadelphia lady. Most women of his acquaintance would be hysterical by now, or at least demanding to be carried. But Grace Lancaster just squared her shoulders, wrung out her skirts as best she could, and started walking. They made slow progress through the forest. The undergrowth was thick, and Grace's heavy skirts kept catching on branches and thorns. Zachary stayed close to her, ready to catch her if she stumbled, but she never complained. She just kept putting one foot in front of the other with grim determination. "Tell me about yourself, Zachary Griffin," Grace said after they had been walking for about an hour. Her voice was strained with exhaustion, but she was clearly trying to keep her spirits up. "What does a deputy do in a town like Republic?" "Whatever needs doing," Zachary replied. "The sheriff is old and mostly useless, so I handle most of the real work. Breaking up fights in the saloons, tracking down thieves, trying to keep the miners from killing each other over claims, and tracking down bandits when necessary. This particular gang has been operating in the area for about 3 months. They hit wagon trains and stage coaches, take the money and supplies and disappear into the mountains. So far, they have not killed anyone, but it was only a matter of time." "Did they kill anyone today?" Grace asked quietly. "I do not know," Zachary admitted. "I saw the ambush start, saw you go into the river and went after you. I did not see what happened after that." Grace was silent for a moment, processing this. "The man driving our wagon, his name was Samuel. He had a wife and 3 children waiting for him back in Spokane Falls. I hope he is all right." "I hope so too." They walked on in silence, saving their breath for the climb. The terrain was getting steeper now as they moved away from the river and into the foothills. Zachary could see that Grace was struggling, her breathing becoming labored and her steps increasingly unsteady. But she did not ask to stop, and he did not suggest it. They needed to cover as much ground as possible before dark. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon when they finally crested a ridge and Zachary saw smoke in the distance. "There," he said, pointing. "That is Copper Creek." Grace let out a small sound of relief. Thank God, but her relief was premature. The mining camp was still at least 2 miles away, and between them and their destination was a steep ravine that would require careful navigation. Zachary looked at Grace's pale, exhausted face and made a decision. "We are going to rest here for a few minutes," he said. "Catch our breath before the final push." Grace did not argue. She sank down onto a fallen log with a grateful sigh, pulling off her sodden boots to massage her blistered feet. Zachary sat down beside her, close enough that he could feel the cold radiating from her body. They were both still soaked, and now that they had stopped moving, the chill was setting in fast. "We should keep moving," Grace said after only a minute, though her body was clearly begging for more rest, "before we get too cold." "Just a few more minutes," Zachary said. He stood and started gathering branches and twigs, piling them together in a small clearing. "Are you making a fire?" Grace asked hopefully. "Trying to." "My matches were in my saddlebag, but sometimes I carry a spare in my boot." He pulled off one boot and shook it out and was rewarded with a small waterproof tin that rattled when he opened it. Inside were 6 matches, miraculously dry. "You are a miracle worker," Grace breathed. "Not yet. Let us see if I can actually get anything to light." It took 3 matches and a lot of coaxing, but eventually Zachary managed to get a small fire going. The flames were weak and smoky, fed by damp wood, but it was warmth. Grace moved closer immediately, holding her hands out to the heat with a grateful moan. "Better?" Zachary asked. "Much. Though I am not sure we should linger. Will the bandits not be able to see the smoke? Probably. But I am more worried about you dying of cold than I am about bandits at this point. Just a few minutes to warm up and dry out a bit, then we move." They sat by the fire in companionable silence, too tired for conversation. Zachary found himself studying Grace in the flickering light, noting details he had been too busy surviving to notice before. She had a small scar on her chin, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Her hands were elegant but not soft, with calluses that suggested she was not afraid of work. And when she glanced over and caught him staring, she did not blush or look away. She just held his gaze with a directness that made his pulse quicken. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked. "That you are very brave," Zachary said honestly. "Most people would have fallen apart by now." I did fall apart. I nearly drowned and you had to save me. You went into a raging river that you had no way of escaping. That is terrifying. But you are here now, walking through the wilderness in wet clothes without complaint. That takes courage." Grace smiled, the expression transforming her face. "My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. I suppose he was right. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you alive out here." "Is that what keeps you alive? Stubborn determination. That and a healthy respect for danger, which is why we need to get moving again." Zachary stood and kicked dirt over the fire, smothering the flames. "Ready?" Grace pulled her boots back on with a grimace and stood. "Ready." The descent into the ravine was treacherous. The slope was steep and covered in loose rocks that shifted treacherously underfoot. Zachary went first, testing each step before committing his weight, and Grace followed close behind. Halfway down, her foot slipped on a patch of scree and she let out a small cry as she started to fall. Zachary turned and caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist to steady her. "I have got you," he said, the words echoing what he had said in the river. Grace looked up at him, her face inches from his. "You keep saving me." "That seems to be becoming a habit." They stood there for a moment, frozen in that position, and Zachary felt something shift between them. It was not just gratitude in Grace's eyes anymore, and what he was feeling was definitely more complicated than simple protective instinct. She was warm in his arms despite the cold, and her lips were parted slightly as she caught her breath, and he had the sudden, powerful urge to kiss her. Instead, he carefully set her back on her feet and stepped away. "Watch your footing," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. They made it to the bottom of the ravine without further incident and started the climb up the other side. The mining camp was visible now, a collection of rough wooden buildings and tents clustered around the mouth of a mine shaft. Zachary could see men moving around, and the sound of picks on rock echoed across the valley. "Almost there," Zachary said encouragingly. Grace nodded, too out of breath to speak. She was moving on pure determination now, her face pale with exhaustion. Zachary stayed close, ready to catch her if she fell, but she made it to the top of the ravine under her own power. The miners spotted them as they approached the camp, and several men came out to meet them, their faces curious and concerned. "Deputy Griffin," one of them said, a burly man with a thick beard. "What in blazes happened to you?" "Long story, Jack," Zachary replied. "This is Miss Lancaster. We need dry clothes, food, and a wagon to get back to Republic." Of course," Jack said, his eyes widening as he took in their bedraggled appearance. "Come on, let us get you inside and warmed up. Martha," he called toward one of the buildings. "We have got guests and they are half frozen." A stout woman with graying hair appeared in the doorway, took one look at Grace, and immediately went into action. "You poor dear," she said, hurrying over to wrap a blanket around Grace's shoulders. "Come inside right now. I will get you some dry clothes and hot food." Grace looked at Zachary and he nodded. "Go on, I will be fine." Martha led Grace away, talking the entire time about hot baths and warm stew, and Jack turned to Zachary with raised eyebrows. "So," he said, "that was quite an entrance. What happened?" Zachary gave him a brief version of events, while Jack found him dry clothes and a cup of hot coffee. The miners listened with rapt attention, asking questions about the bandits and the ambush. By the time Zachary had finished his story and changed into borrowed clothes, word had spread through the entire camp. Several men offered to ride back to Republic with him to check on the wagon train survivors and help hunt down the bandits. "I appreciate the offer," Zachary said. "But right now I need to make sure Miss Lancaster gets to Republic safely. After that, we can organize a posse. That lady must be something special. Jack observed with a knowing grin. "You did not have to jump in that river after her. Could have just tried to rope her from the bank. She would have drowned. Maybe. Or maybe you just could not stand the thought of letting her die." Zachary did not reply because he was not sure what the honest answer would be. Yes, he would have jumped in to save anyone in that situation. It was his job, his duty. But there had been something about Grace Lancaster, something that had called to him on a level deeper than duty. From the moment their eyes met in that churning water, he had known that letting her die was simply not an option. Grace emerged from Martha's cabin an hour later looking like a different person. She was clean and dry, dressed in a simple calico dress that Martha had loaned her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and there was color in her cheeks again. She looked rested and well-fed, and when she smiled at Zachary, he felt his heart skip a beat. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Worlds better. Martha has been incredibly kind. She even gave me these." Grace held up a pair of sturdy boots. "Mine were ruined. Good. We have a wagon ready whenever you are prepared to travel. It is about a 2-hour ride back to Republic, but the road is decent and we will be there before full dark." Grace nodded. "I am ready now if you are." Jack had prepared a wagon with 2 horses and loaded it with supplies. He handed the reins to Zachary with a serious expression. "Be careful out there. If those bandits are still around, you will be an easy target. I know, but we will be fine." Zachary helped Grace up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue at the horses and they started moving, heading west along the rough mining road. The sun was low on the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, and Zachary was acutely aware of Grace sitting beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves. Then Grace spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what? About today. About what happened in the river." Zachary kept his eyes on the road. "What about it? You could have died. If you had not been strong enough or if the current had been too much, we both would have drowned, but you never hesitated. You just jumped in and held me up until we reached calmer water. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Many men would not have done it. They would have tried to help from the bank, or they would have told themselves it was too dangerous. But you did not even think about it. You just acted. I am a deputy. Protecting people is my job." "It was more than that," Grace said softly. "I saw your face in the water. You were not just doing your job, you cared." Zachary did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But his silence was apparently answer enough for Grace, because she smiled and looked out at the darkening landscape with an expression of contentment. They reached Republic as the last light was fading from the sky. The town was bustling with activity, and Zachary immediately spotted several wagons from the ambush train parked near the hotel. Relief flooded through him. At least some of the travelers had made it to safety. "Wait here," he told Grace as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "I need to check on things." But before he could climb down, a man came running over, his face lighting up with recognition. "Deputy Griffin, thank God you are alive. We thought you had drowned chasing after that woman." "The woman is right here," Zachary said, gesturing to Grace. "And we are both fine. What happened after I went into the river?" "The bandits scattered once you showed up. I guess they did not want to tangle with the law. Everyone from the train made it here safely, though a few folks got roughed up a bit. No one was killed, thank the Lord." "That is good news. What about my horse?" "He came back on his own about an hour ago. He is at the stable." Zachary nodded, then helped Grace down from the wagon. "Come on," he said. "Let us get you settled at the hotel." The hotel was a modest 2-story building with a saloon on the first floor. The owner, a thin man named Mr. Peterson, showed Grace to a small but clean room on the second floor, clucking sympathetically about her ordeal. Zachary waited downstairs, suddenly exhausted now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His entire body ached, and all he wanted was a hot meal and a soft bed. Grace came back down after a few minutes, having left her borrowed bag in the room. "Mr. Peterson says the dining room is still serving dinner. Would you join me?" Zachary wanted to say yes more than he had wanted anything in a long time, but protocol and propriety dictated otherwise. "I should not," he said reluctantly. "It would not be proper, and you have had a long day." "Proper," Grace repeated, a slight edge to her voice. "I think we are past worrying about proper, do you not agree? You held me in your arms for the better part of an hour. I think we can share a meal together." She had a point, and Zachary found he did not have the energy to argue. "All right," he said, "but only if you let me pay. You have been through enough without having to worry about expenses." They ate in the hotel dining room, a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread. The food was good and the company was better. Grace told him about her life in Philadelphia, about the controlling father who had tried to dictate every aspect of her future, and about the uncle she had barely known who had given her a chance at freedom with his unexpected bequest. "I know it is mad," Grace said, tearing off a piece of bread. "Coming all this way to claim land I have never seen, in a territory I know nothing about. But I could not stay in Philadelphia. I could not spend the rest of my life being told what to do, who to marry, how to live. I needed to be my own person." "That is not mad," Zachary said. "That is brave." "You keep saying that. Brave. But I do not feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Grace looked at him with those striking green eyes, and Zachary felt something tighten in his chest. He had known this woman for less than a day, had spent most of that time fighting for both their lives, and yet he felt more connected to her than he had to anyone in years. "What about you?" Grace asked. "What brought you to Republic?" "I grew up here," Zachary said. "Well, not here exactly. My father had a ranch about 20 miles south. He died when I was 17 and my mother passed a year later. I sold the ranch and moved to town, took a job as a deputy because I was good with a gun and not much else." "I am sure that is not true." "It is true enough. I am not educated like you. I can read and write and do basic arithmetic, but that is about it. What I am good at is tracking, shooting, and staying alive. Those are useful skills in a place like this. They are more than useful. They are essential. And you are also kind, which is perhaps the most valuable quality of all." Zachary felt heat rise in his face, and he looked down at his plate. He was not used to such direct praise, especially from a woman who looked like Grace Lancaster. Beautiful, educated, refined Grace Lancaster, who could have her pick of men back in Philadelphia, but was instead sitting in a rough mining town eating stew with a deputy who had nothing to offer but a dangerous job and an uncertain future. They finished their meal and Zachary walked Grace to her room, very aware of the proprieties even if Grace seemed inclined to ignore them. He stopped at her door, keeping a respectful distance. "Thank you for dinner," Grace said, "and for everything else today. I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything," Zachary said. "I am just glad you are safe. Will I see you tomorrow, if you want to? I need to organize a posse to go after those bandits, but I can stop by in the morning to check on you." "I would like that." Grace stepped closer, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. It was a chaste gesture, nothing improper, but it sent electricity racing through Zachary's entire body. He stood frozen as she pulled back, smiling at him with a warmth that made his knees weak. "Good night, Zachary Griffin," she said softly. "Good night, Grace Lancaster." Zachary made himself turn and walk away, though every instinct urged him to stay. He could feel her watching him until he reached the stairs, and when he glanced back, she was still standing in her doorway, that same warm smile on her face. He spent the night at the boarding house where he rented a room, but sleep was elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace's face in the water, felt the weight of her in his arms, heard her voice calling him brave. He had saved many people in his time as a deputy, had pulled men from burning buildings and talked down angry drunks with guns. But none of it had affected him the way today had. None of it had made him feel the way Grace made him feel. When dawn broke, Zachary gave up on sleep and went to the sheriff's office to start organizing the posse. Sheriff Coleman was there, nursing a cup of coffee and looking half asleep. He listened to Zachary's report with growing alarm, then agreed that something needed to be done about the bandits. "Take whoever you need," Coleman said. "Just bring those bastards in, preferably alive, so we can hang them proper." By mid-morning, Zachary had assembled a group of 8 men, all experienced riders and fighters. They were loading supplies onto their horses when Grace appeared, dressed in practical traveling clothes that Mr. Peterson's wife had helped her acquire. "I want to come with you," she announced. Zachary turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "It is my wagon train they attacked. I have as much right as anyone to see justice done." "It is too dangerous. We are going after armed criminals, not taking a Sunday ride." "I am aware of that." "I am not asking to be protected or coddled. I am asking to help." "Grace," Zachary said, trying to keep his voice reasonable. "You were nearly killed yesterday. You need to rest and recover, not go charging off into the mountains after bandits." "What I need is to not feel helpless," Grace said, her eyes flashing. "What I need is to do something instead of sitting in a hotel room worrying and waiting. Please, Zachary, let me help." Zachary wanted to refuse. Every protective instinct in his body was screaming at him to keep her safe, to leave her in town where she could not get hurt. But he also understood what she was feeling. After everything she had been through, she needed to take back some control, to be active instead of passive. "Can you ride?" he asked finally. "Yes, I am not an expert, but I can stay in the saddle." "Can you shoot?" Grace hesitated. "I have never fired a gun before." "Then you are not coming." "I am sorry, Grace, but I cannot have someone in the posse who cannot defend themselves. It puts everyone at risk." Grace opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She knew he was right, even if she did not like it. "Then teach me," she said instead. "Right now, teach me to shoot, and then I will come with you." Zachary looked at her determined face and knew he was fighting a losing battle. "We do not have time for a full lesson." "Then give me a short one, please." Against his better judgment, Zachary agreed. He led Grace to the edge of town where there was an open field, set up some targets, and gave her a quick lesson in handling his spare revolver. Grace proved to be a natural, her hands steady and her eyes sharp. After 30 minutes of practice, she was hitting the targets more often than not. "This is just basic target shooting," Zachary warned her. "Actually shooting at someone who is shooting back is completely different. If it comes to a fight, I want you to stay behind cover and let the men handle it." "Understood." "Understood," Grace agreed, though he could see in her eyes that she was already planning to do whatever she thought was necessary. They rode out an hour later, following the trail of the bandits back toward the ambush site. The trail was easy to follow at first, with clear hoof prints in the muddy road, but it got harder as they moved into the mountains. The bandits had split up, with some heading north and others going south. Zachary made the decision to follow the larger group north, reasoning that they would lead to the main hideout. Grace rode beside him, handling her horse with competence if not grace. She did not complain about the pace or the rough terrain, just kept her eyes forward and her hand near the gun Zachary had loaned her. The other men in the posse had been skeptical about bringing a woman along, but Grace's quiet determination was winning them over. They rode for most of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of jerky and hardtack. The trail led them deeper into the mountains, following narrow paths that clung to the sides of steep cliffs. It was dangerous country, the kind of place where one wrong step could send horse and rider tumbling to their deaths. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they crested a ridge and Zachary spotted smoke in the valley below. He held up a hand to halt the group, then dismounted and moved to the edge for a better look. There was a cabin nestled in a small clearing, with a corral holding maybe a dozen horses. Several men were visible, moving around the cabin. "That is them," Zachary said quietly. "Jack, you and Tom circle around to the north. Pete, take your group south. Grace, you stay here with me." The men dispersed silently, moving into position. Zachary checked his weapons, then looked at Grace. "No matter what happens, you stay behind cover. If shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. Promise me." "I promise," Grace said, though her face was pale with fear and anticipation. They waited until the other groups were in position, then Zachary stood and called down to the cabin. "This is Deputy Zachary Griffin. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a man appeared in the cabin doorway, a rifle in his hands. "You are bluffing, lawman. There is no way you have enough men to surround us." "Try me," Zachary called back. "I've got 8 men and we have all the high ground." "You cannot win this. Give up now and you will get a fair trial," the man laughed. "A fair trial that ends with us hanging? No thank you." He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet whined past Zachary's head and he dove for cover, pulling Grace down with him. All hell broke loose as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The bandits poured out of the cabin, shooting wildly, while Zachary's posse returned fire from their positions. It was loud and chaotic and terrifying. Zachary kept Grace pinned behind a large boulder, using his body to shield her as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. He fired back when he had a clear shot, aiming for legs and shoulders rather than killing blows. He wanted these men alive to stand trial, not dead. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. When it was over, 5 bandits were down with wounds and 3 more had their hands up in surrender. One man had been killed, caught by a lucky shot from Tom's rifle, but the rest would live to face justice. Zachary stood slowly, his ears ringing from the gunfire. He did a quick count of his men and relief flooded through him when he saw that everyone was accounted for and mostly unharmed. Pete had taken a bullet through his arm, but it was a clean wound that would heal with time. "Is everyone all right?" Zachary called out. The men confirmed they were fine, already moving to secure the prisoners and tend to the wounded bandits. Zachary turned to check on Grace and found her sitting behind the boulder, her face pale but composed. The gun he had given her was still in her hand, and he could see that she had fired at least once based on the empty chamber. "Did you hit anyone?" Zachary asked. "I do not think so. I fired when one of them was running toward your position, but I think I missed. That is probably for the best. Killing a man, even one who deserves it, is not something you want on your conscience." They secured the prisoners and searched the cabin, finding a substantial amount of stolen goods and cash. Zachary made sure everything was documented and loaded onto the bandits' horses. It would all need to be returned to its rightful owners, which would be a bureaucratic nightmare, but it was better than the alternative. By the time they were ready to head back to Republic, it was full dark. Zachary made the decision to camp for the night and travel back in the morning. They made camp in the clearing, posting guards and keeping the prisoners tied securely. Grace helped with the camp duties, gathering firewood and helping cook the evening meal without being asked. Later, after everyone had eaten and settled in for the night, Zachary found Grace sitting away from the fire, looking up at the stars. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You did well today," he said. "I was terrified the entire time," Grace admitted. "So was I." She turned to look at him with surprise. "Really? You did not seem scared at all." "I have learned to hide it, but I am always scared when there is shooting. Only a fool would not be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest around them. Then Grace spoke again, her voice soft. "I have been thinking about what happens next," she said. "After we get back to Republic. What about it? I still have that land to claim. My uncle's property. I was hoping maybe you could help me find it, show me around, help me figure out what to do with it." "I would be happy to," Zachary said, meaning it more than he had meant anything in a long time. "And maybe after that you could come visit sometimes. Help me settle in. Make sure I do not get into any more trouble." "Grace," Zachary said carefully. "What are you asking me?" Grace turned to face him fully, her green eyes reflecting the distant firelight. "I am asking if you feel what I feel, if yesterday in the river meant as much to you as it did to me. If this connection between us is real or if I am imagining it." Zachary's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "You are not imagining it. Then what do we do about it?" "I do not know," Zachary admitted. "I am not good at this sort of thing. I am not smooth or charming. I am just a man who does his job and tries to stay alive. You deserve better. Better than someone who jumped into a raging river to save my life. Better than someone who held me above the water until help came. Better than someone who is brave and kind and honest. I do not think better exists, Zachary." And then she was kissing him, her lips soft and warm against his. Zachary froze for half a second, then kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face gently. It was sweet and tender and perfect, and when they finally pulled apart, Zachary knew that his life had just changed forever. "I am not easy to love," he warned her, his forehead resting against hers. "I have a dangerous job and I am gone a lot. I do not have much to offer in terms of money or security." "I do not need money or security," Grace said. "I have my own land now, remember. What I need is someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my strength, who will stand beside me instead of trying to protect me from the world." "Can you be that person?" "I can try," Zachary said, "but I will probably fail sometimes. I will probably still want to protect you, even when you do not need it." "I can live with that," Grace said, smiling. "As long as you remember that I am not fragile, I am stubborn and brave, remember." "You said so yourself." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally returned to the fire, the other men studiously avoided looking at them, though several were grinning knowingly. Zachary did not care. Let them grin. He had found something precious in the middle of a crisis, and he was not going to let it go. They returned to Republic the next morning, prisoners in tow, to a hero's welcome. The townspeople lined the streets, cheering and applauding as the posse rode through town. Zachary delivered the prisoners to the sheriff and spent the rest of the day giving statements and filling out paperwork. By the time he finished, it was evening and he was exhausted, but he still went to the hotel to find Grace. She answered his knock immediately as if she had been waiting for him. "How did it go?" "Paperwork is done. The bandits will stand trial next week. The stolen goods are being sorted and returned. It is all handled." "Good. Then you are free for the evening." "I am." "Would you like to have dinner with me? And maybe after, you could show me around town, help me start figuring out where my uncle's property is located." "I would like that very much." They ate dinner in the hotel dining room again, but this time there was no hesitation or uncertainty between them. They talked easily, making plans for the future, discussing what Grace would need to do to officially claim her property and start building a life in Republic. Zachary found himself offering to help with everything, from finding lumber for a cabin to introducing her to the local merchants who could supply what she needed. After dinner, they walked through the town as the sun set, and Zachary showed her where different businesses were located, who was trustworthy and who was not, which streets to avoid after dark. Grace listened intently, asking intelligent questions and making mental notes. She was already thinking like someone who planned to stay, who was committed to making this place her home. They ended up at the land office, where the clerk was just closing up for the night. But when Zachary explained what they needed, the man was happy to stay late and pull the records for Grace's uncle's property. It turned out to be a nice parcel about 3 miles north of town, with good water access and decent soil for farming. "It is a beautiful piece of land," the clerk said. "Your uncle took good care of it. There is already a small cabin on the property, though it might need some repairs." Grace's eyes lit up. "A cabin? Really? Nothing fancy, but it is solid. Your uncle used it when he came up here to hunt and fish. You should be able to make it livable with some work." "Can we go see it?" Grace asked, turning to Zachary. "Tomorrow, of course. I will take you first thing in the morning." They left the land office and walked back to the hotel slowly, neither of them ready for the evening to end. The streets were quieter now, most people having gone home for dinner or to the saloons. The air was cool and smelled of pine and wood smoke. "I cannot believe this is my life now," Grace said, looking around at the rough buildings and dusty streets. 2 days ago I was on a wagon train, terrified and uncertain. Yesterday I nearly drowned. Today I am planning to build a life in a mining town in the Washington Territory. It seems impossible." "Nothing about you seems impossible," Zachary said. "You are the most capable person I have ever met." "I am not capable. I am just determined. There is a difference, if you say so." They reached the hotel and stood outside, reluctant to part ways. Finally, Grace took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Thank you for today," she said. "For everything. For saving my life, for including me in the posse, for helping me find my land, for making me feel like I belong here." "You do belong here," Zachary said. "I knew it the moment I saw you. That was when I was drowning, even then, especially then. You were fighting so hard to survive, to stay alive. You had this fierce determination in your eyes. I knew right then that you were someone special." Grace stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Good night, Zachary." "Good night, Grace." The next morning they rode out to see Grace's property together. The cabin was just as the clerk had described it, small but solid, with a beautiful view of the mountains. It needed work, but nothing that could not be fixed with time and effort. Grace walked through it with growing excitement, already planning where furniture would go and what improvements she would make. "It is perfect," she said, standing in the doorway and looking out at the surrounding forest. "It is exactly what I needed." "It is isolated," Zachary warned. "You will be out here alone most of the time. Are you sure you want that?" Grace turned to look at him with a raised eyebrow. "Will I be alone? I was hoping a certain deputy might visit regularly, maybe even consider making this his permanent residence eventually if things work out between us." Zachary felt his pulse quicken. "Are you asking me to move in with you? Not immediately, but someday if we continue as we have been. Is that so shocking? Most women would not be so forward about it." "I am not most women. I thought we had established that." Zachary crossed the small cabin to stand in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "No, you are definitely not most women, And yes, if things continue as they have been, I would very much like to make this place my home. With you." They spent the rest of the day at the property, making plans and taking measurements. Zachary promised to bring tools and supplies the next day to start on the repairs. Other men from town would help too, once word got out that the brave lady from the wagon train ambush was settling nearby. Everyone wanted to be part of her story now. Over the next few weeks, the cabin was transformed. The roof was patched, the windows repaired, and the interior cleaned and furnished with items Grace purchased in town. She proved to be resourceful and hardworking, not afraid to get her hands dirty or learn new skills. Zachary found himself spending every spare moment at the property, helping with projects during the day and staying for dinner in the evenings. They grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's habits and quirks. Zachary discovered that Grace sang while she worked, old folk songs from her childhood in Philadelphia. Grace learned that Zachary was afraid of spiders but would never admit it out loud. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly fell deeper in love. The trial of the bandits was quick and decisive. All of them were found guilty and sentenced to prison terms, except for the leader who received a death sentence for previous murders. Grace attended the trial, giving testimony about the ambush, and was satisfied to see justice done. Summer turned to fall, and the mountains around Republic blazed with color. Grace's cabin was finished and fully livable, and she had started a small garden that would hopefully produce vegetables the following spring. She was becoming a familiar face in town, known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone who needed it. Several times, she rode out with Zachary when he was investigating minor crimes, providing a calm presence and often helping to diffuse tense situations. It was on a cool October evening as they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set that Zachary finally said what had been on his mind for weeks. "Marry me," he said, without preamble or fancy words. Grace turned to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What? Marry me?" "I know I am not much of a catch. I am rough and uneducated, and I will probably get myself killed chasing some criminal someday. But I love you, Grace Lancaster. I have loved you since the moment I pulled you out of that river, and I want to spend whatever time I have left in this world by your side." Grace stared at him for a long moment, and Zachary felt his heart sink. He had been too forward, too abrupt. He should have gotten a ring first, should have planned something romantic. He was about to apologize when Grace launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him so hard they almost fell off the bench. "Yes," she said between kisses. "Yes, yes, yes, of course I will marry you. Really, did you think I would say no? I love you, you foolish man. I have loved you since you held me above that water and told me you were not going to let me die. How could I not love someone who would risk everything to save me?" They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the church in Republic. Half the town attended, everyone wanting to celebrate the union of the brave deputy and the lady he had saved. Grace wore a simple white dress that Martha from the mining camp had helped her sew, and Zachary wore his best suit, which he had not worn since his mother's funeral years before. Sheriff Coleman performed the ceremony, his gravelly voice surprisingly gentle as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Zachary kissed Grace, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was a perfect moment, the kind Zachary had never thought he would experience. They moved into the cabin together, and for the first time in his adult life, Zachary had a real home. Not just a place to sleep between jobs, but an actual home with someone who loved him waiting when he came back. It changed him in subtle ways, made him more careful when he was working, more aware of his own mortality. He had something to lose now, someone depending on him to come home safe. Grace continued to surprise him with her adaptability and strength. She learned to hunt and fish, became an excellent shot with a rifle, and even helped Zachary track down a horse thief who had been plaguing the area. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and their love deepened with each passing season. 2 years after their wedding, Grace gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named Zachary Jr., but called Zeke to avoid confusion. Zachary had been terrified throughout the pregnancy, haunted by memories of his own mother dying when he was young. But Grace had laughed at his fears and assured him she was made of stronger stuff than that. She had been right. The birth was quick and uncomplicated, and when Zachary held his son for the first time, he felt a love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This tiny human was his, created from the love between him and Grace, and he swore in that moment that he would do everything in his power to give his son a better life than he had known. Grace recovered quickly and was soon back to her usual activities, though now with a baby strapped to her back much of the time. She took motherhood in stride, the same way she took everything else, with determination and practicality. Zachary found himself falling in love with her all over again as he watched her with their son, singing those old folk songs as she rocked him to sleep, her face soft with tenderness. As Zeke grew, the family grew with him. 2 years after his birth, Grace delivered twin girls, Emma and Alina, who had their mother's green eyes and their father's dark hair. The cabin seemed to shrink with 3 children running around, and Zachary began planning an addition that would give them more space. He had been promoted to sheriff by then, Sheriff Coleman having finally retired to live with his daughter in Spokane. Zachary took his new responsibilities seriously, working to make Republic a safer, more lawful town. But he always made time for his family, riding home every evening to have dinner with Grace and the children, to read them stories and tuck them into bed. Life was good, better than Zachary had ever imagined it could be. He had a wife he adored, children he would die for, and a job that gave him purpose. The dangers he had once courted recklessly now seemed foolish, because he had so much to live for. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary and Grace took a rare evening away from the children, leaving them with Martha, who had become like a grandmother to the family. They rode back to the spot on the Kettle River, where Zachary had pulled Grace from the water 5 years before. The river was calm now, flowing peacefully through the canyon in the golden light of evening. They stood on the bank, hand in hand, looking at the water that had brought them together in such dramatic fashion. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked softly. "All the time," Zachary admitted. "I think about how close we came to dying, how if the current had been just a bit stronger, or if I had not been able to hold on, neither of us would be here now. Zeke and Emma and Alina would never have been born. All of this would not exist." "But you did hold on," Grace said, squeezing his hand. "You held me above the water until help came. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Zachary said, turning to look at her. "Before you, I was just going through the motions of life. I did my job and I stayed alive, but I was not really living. You changed that. You gave me a reason to come home, a reason to be careful, a reason to build something that would last." Grace smiled, the expression lighting up her face the way it always did. She was 30 now, a mother of 3, with lines around her eyes from laughter and work. But to Zachary, she was just as beautiful as she had been that first day in the river, maybe more so because now he knew the depth of her strength and the breadth of her love. "I think we were meant to find each other," Grace said. "I think I was meant to fall in that river and you were meant to be there to save me. Everything that happened, all the fear and danger, it was leading us to this, to our life together." "I am glad you fell in the river then," Zachary said with a slight smile. "So am I, though I would prefer not to repeat the experience." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the water. Then they turned and walked back to their horses, ready to return home to their children and the life they had built together. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Zachary thought about how much had changed in 5 years, how one moment of crisis had become the foundation of everything good in his life. He had jumped into that river without thinking, driven by instinct and duty. But what he had found in those churning waters was not just someone to save, but someone to love, someone to build a future with. Grace had been right. They were meant to find each other, and he would be grateful for that gift every day for the rest of his life. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the deepening of their love. Zeke grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, much to his mother's delight. The twins were wild and fearless, always getting into mischief, but always looking out for each other. Grace gave birth to 2 more children over the years, another boy named Henry and a daughter named Rose, filling their expanded cabin with noise and laughter. Republic grew too, transforming from a rough mining town into a proper settlement with a school, a real church, and even a newspaper. Zachary served as sheriff for over a decade, finally retiring when his youngest child started school so he could spend more time with his family. He had earned the respect of everyone in town through years of fair, honest work, and when he stepped down, there was a big celebration in his honor. Grace had become a pillar of the community as well, known for her intelligence and her willingness to help anyone in need. She taught at the school for a while, started a lending library in their home, and served as an informal counselor to women who were struggling with the harsh realities of frontier life. She had found her place in this wild country, had made it her own, and had thrived in ways she never could have back in Philadelphia. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children, now ranging from 18 down to 8 years old, organized a surprise party at the church. The entire town showed up to celebrate, sharing stories about the sheriff and his lady, about the dramatic rescue that had brought them together, about the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of life in the Washington Territory. Zachary stood with Grace in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by their children and friends, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what he had fought for, what he had worked for, what he had risked everything to protect. Not just his own happiness, but the happiness of everyone in this room, everyone in this town that had become his home. Later that night, after the party had ended and their children were asleep, Zachary and Grace sat on their porch like they had done thousands of times before. The mountains rose dark against the starlit sky, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. "Do you have any regrets?" Zachary asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not a single one," Grace said immediately. "This life, this place, you and our children, it is everything I wanted and more than I ever dreamed." "What about you?" "No regrets," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Well, maybe one. I wish I had kissed you sooner that first night in the hotel. I wasted time worrying about propriety when I should have just followed my heart." Grace laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "You made up for it eventually." "That I did." They sat together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. The river had risen, and she could not swim at all, but the cowboy had held her above the water until help came. And in doing so, he had saved not just her life, but both their futures, creating a love story that would be told in Republic for generations to come. Their children grew and had children of their own, and Zachary and Grace became respected elders in the community. the couple everyone pointed to as an example of true love and commitment. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements becoming slower, but their love never diminishing. When Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Zachary was holding her hand, just as he had held her in that river so many years before. He followed her 6 months later, dying quietly in the same bed they had shared for over 50 years. They were buried side by side in the cemetery overlooking Republic, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Zachary and Grace Griffin, united by chance, bound by love together forever. And sometimes, on quiet spring evenings when the Kettle River was running high with snowmelt, people in Republic would tell the story of the brave deputy and the lady he saved, of how he had held her above the water until help came, and how that single act of courage had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a story about bravery and determination, about finding love in the most unexpected places, and about the power of one person's decision to risk everything for another. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. And in Republic, Washington, it always would be.